In this tutorial, we'll be covering implementing some of the new 2.0 features into current story framework projects. Please be sure to follow this tutorial in order if you're planning to implement specific parts of 2.0 or specific features. You would need to make sure that you're following this from start to finish. Any resources used in this guide will be linked in the description below. Let's jump right into it. Firstly, we're going to be adding the new event dispatches. These are dispatch events that can be binded to custom functionality when specific systems or interaction is executed. An example of this will be shown further into the guide. So let's go into our content browser, into our story framework folder, and locate the interaction component. So into core, we're going to find the interaction manager. We're going to open this guy up. We're going to add a few new event dispatches here. So the first one will be called onInteracted. The next one will be called onDialogReply. And then the next few will be for the QuickTime events, which we will be setting up. So let's do on QTE success, on QTE fail, and on QTE key pressed. So for the onInteracted dispatcher, we're going to add a parameter. This will be called target interaction data, and we're going to change this parameter to interact data. Let's compile and save. So this event dispatcher will be called inside the root interaction collapsed graph. So this will get called just before the prerequisite logic for the primary interaction, and just after setting the target interaction data for the secondary interaction. So we can drag this out and select call. We can plug this in here. And same thing for the primary interaction. Let's compile and save. Now on the dialog reply event dispatcher, we're going to add another parameter, and we're going to call this reply option. We're going to change this to a text. Now we'll be setting this inside the NPC manager. So if we go back into our content browser, components, other, and NPC manager. Now inside of the NPC manager, we're going to open up the input reply logic collapsed graph. Then we're going to open up the custom camera replies, and we're going to do a reference to the interaction manager. So we're going to right click and search for get SF interaction manager, and we're going to search for call on dialog reply. We're going to plug this in between the play sound with subtitles and the update replies function. So we're going to use the same value that gets plugged into the update replies function for the reply option on the event dispatcher. And we're going to do this same procedure for the default camera replies again. Let's compile and save. Now we're going to call this event dispatcher one more time. This will be inside the update replies logic collapsed graph. So off of this false execution pin on this branch, where we are stopping conversation, we're going to simply call this event dispatcher again, and we're going to give it the reply option of end. Let's compile and save one more time. So now we have all the event dispatchers set up correctly. We're now going to jump into setting up QuickTime events. Now let's go ahead and add the new structures and enumerators used by the QuickTime events. So we go into our content browser, story framework, core, blueprints, and we open up the structures folder. We're going to add 2 new structures here. So if we right click, we go to blueprints, find structure. First one will be called QTE input data. Let's open this guy up, and we're going to add a few new variables. So let's first change the name of this one to keyboard input. Let's change it to a key. We're going to add 6 in total, 6 variables. Next one will be called gamepad input. Third one will be a text variable, as well as the fourth one. This one will be called keyboard input display name, and then gamepad input display name. So these will be used on the QuickTime event prompts. So for instance, if we have the keyboard input set to spacebar, we can set the display name to spacebar. Or if we have the keyboard input set to F, we would have the display name set to F. And then same thing with gamepad input. So if we have the gamepad input binded to, let's say, the face button left, so on Xbox that would be the X button, we would have the gamepad input display name set to X. Next one will be, or the fifth variable will be a bool. We're going to call this ignore specific keys. This will actually be a key variable, not a bool. And the next one will be a bool. This key variable will be a map. So any keys added to this map will be ignored. And then this final variable will be called ignore all keys except target. So this basically will ignore any other key on the keyboard or on the gamepad other than the key that is used for keypad or keyboard input or gamepad input. So let's go back to the content browser and add another structure variables. We'll call this QTE type data _s. So this will be used for the information required for the new QTE modes, the different QTE modes, the 2 different QTE modes. So this first one will be called time. Let's add these tags just so we know what these variables are used for, which mode they're used for. So OT stands for on timer, the on timer mode, and TKP would stand for the target key pressed mode. We'll get to this once we set up the enumerator for the different modes. So the time will be used for both modes. We'll set this as a float. The next variable will be num of presses, and this will be for the TKP mode. So this is the number of key presses that is required when using the target key press mode for the QTE. So let's save this. Back into our content browser, we're going to go to blueprints and then enumerators, and we're going to add a new enumerator. We're going to call it QTE type _e, and we're going to have two entries in here, and the first one will be called on timer, and give it its tag, or its abbreviation, sorry. And the next one will be target key presses. So we use these abbreviations just so that we know which variables communicate with one another. So that's these. Now let's move on to setting up the functionality and the widget for the QTEs. Firstly, you would now need to create a fresh version or a fresh story framework project inside version 2.0. So I'm going to hop over into that version now. So now inside our new version 2.0 story framework project, we're going to open up the content browser. We're going to go to core, user interface, and we're going to migrate over this entire materials folder. So we're going to right click and find migrate. You can leave everything ticked here, hit OK. And then find your project. In my case, it's SF upgrade. Select your content folder and then hit migrate. And then we need one more thing. So inside widgets, we're looking for the QTE input _W. So we're going to right click on this again and then find asset actions and migrate. We're going to deselect everything and we're going to go down and look for the widgets folder. So under user interface, we're looking for widgets. We're looking for the QTE input _W. We can hit OK. Same thing, look for our project and our content folder and hit migrate. So that's everything we need from the version 2.0 story framework project. So now we can hop back into our original project. Now inside our original project, let's go into our content browser and make sure everything migrated over correctly. So our materials folder has our circular progress bar, and widgets, we have the QTE inputs _W. So let's open this guy up. You'll see we are getting a few issues here. Some we can resolve now, the rest we will resolve themselves once we've added in the other QTE functionality. So let's drop down this break QTE input data and we need to just reconnect these display name pins. So keyboard input display name into keyboard key, and same thing with gamepad. And then on the break QTE type data, we can connect time back into target timer. We compile. Now we can hop onto the next part of the QTE functionality. So let's find the interaction manager again. So components, core, interaction manager. Now in the description of this video, there are 3 paste bin links. These links are for all the different segments of functionality for the QTEs. So we're going to go down and look for the QuickTime event function. And we're going to copy and paste that paste bin link into our browser. So in a new tab, we can just hit Control V. Let's hit Control A and copy everything here. And now back in our blueprint graph, if we just hit paste, it will create our QuickTime events function. Now we need to go ahead and create these variables that are being set. So we can right click and hit create variable. Let's add it to its own category. We'll call it QTE. Just keep everything nice and neat. Same thing with QTE type. And then on the function itself, the inputs, we need to change the settings name just to setting so that we can create this variable as well. As if we don't change the name, the function sort of recognizes the name of this variable as the same as this input, the pin on this input. So it's sort of treating it as a local variable in a sense, which is not what we want. So we can change that name and then right click on this and hit create variable. Again, drag these under QTE and then QTE widget ref, again, create variable. We hit compile. Now I'm going to get these 2 errors from our delegate pins on the input of the function. To resolve these, we just simply need to hold Control and drag these pins back into the function to create new pins. For some reason, the original pins push weird errors. They don't get read correctly, so we can just delete those old ones, hit compile again, and just rename these to on success and on fail. Can hit compile and save. So that's the create QuickTime event function done. Same thing again, down into the description, we're looking for the get QTE key conditions function link. So let's copy that link and back into our browser, new tab, and paste it in. Copy and paste in our blueprint graph. So now we have the get QTE key conditions. And now here we're just going to reconnect these pins into the new pins we created. So keyboard input, gamepad inputs, ignore specific keys, and ignore all keys. So that's that set up. Finally, we're going to go into the description again and find the QTE input functionality link. Let's copy that pastebin link, and then same thing again, new tab, paste it in, Control A to copy, or to select and then copy. And then we're going to paste it into the event graph. We can just slot him in underneath the rest of these functions, or events, sorry. Let's remove the 2 from this collapsed graph name. Take compile. Again, we're going to get some errors, so this variable we're setting needs to be created. Let's create this guy and slot him underneath the QTE category again. Take compile. Let's just quickly rename these and remove the number 2 at the end of both collapsed graphs. And then inside the target key presses, we're just going to connect or reconnect up the num of presses integer value. Compile and save again. So that should be the basis of all the QTE functionality that is required inside the interaction manager. If we go back into the widget, the QTE input widget, and hit compile, all these errors will now have resolved themselves as we've just created all the required variables. Now we're going to move on to relocating the AnyKey input action functionality. We're going to move it into our character controller blueprint, as it's a bit of a better place for it to be situated, as it is an input function and all the input function or input actions are kept inside the player controller in the case of story framework, as well as we need to use it for the QTE input function. So let's go into our content browser. We can go to core, example, character, blueprints, and then our player controller. This would be your player controller where you have all the story framework actor components attached to and the input actions set up. So let's click on our camera manager actor component and right click and find edit. And then we're looking for the integrate gamepad sense functionality. So I'm going to find this and copy it and just remove it from here. Back in our player controller, we can paste it in here and then collapse to a collapsed graph. We'll call it other inputs. Let's open him up. Take compile. Now we're going to right click and search for get SF interaction manager. Off of here, we're going to search for QTE inputs. We can plug this in here, and then we can connect up the key from the AnyKey into the key for the QTE input. So let's compile and save. Let's do a little test to make sure everything's working correctly. So just in our event begin play, we can right click and search for get SF interaction manager again. Drag off and search create QuickTime event. For this example, we'll actually use a target key presses. QTE setting, we can drag off and search for make. Let's say the player has to hit the target key 10 times and he has 3 seconds to do so. Off of the QTE inputs, again, you can click make. We'll set the keyboard key to, let's make it V. And we can leave the gamepad as empty at the moment because we're not setting that up. And then in our keyboard input display name, we would have that set to V as well. Let's also tick ignore all keys. Make sure that's all working correctly. Let's give the widget offsets 250 on the X. And this is where we would now set up our functionality for on success and on fail for the QTE. So we can right click, search for custom events. We can do this on QTE success, and again custom events on QTE fail. Now we can drag off of these delegate pins and search for create event. And we're searching for on QTE success. We'll copy and paste this create event, and we're searching for on QTE fail. Now let's do a print string, or we'll use a print int. So unsuccess will result in it printing the integer value 1, and on fail will print the integer value 0. To compile and save. Let's give this a small delay, just so we have some time to see it actually get created. Let's open up our example map and hit play, make sure this is all working correctly. As you can see, we get our QuickTime event. We failed it, we got the input value 0. Let's create it one more time, so if we just close out and hit play, and we got the integer value printed out as 1 after we succeeded the QTE. So now we can just go ahead and delete all this example functionality we just set up. Now let's move on to setting up the new per instance collision radiuses for the interactable items. So if we open up our content browser again, we go to call blueprints. We're looking for the interactable base BP. We're going to add a new variable, and we're going to call this custom collision radius. Let's make it a float. Let's expose it. Next, we're going to go to the viewports. We're going to hit add. We're looking for sphere collision. So this will be, we can rename this component and call it custom collision. Inside our construction script, we can drag out of this, or we can drag this component into our graph and drag off this component variable and search for radius. We're going to look for set sphere radius. And we can plug in our custom collision radius into this node. We're going to copy this set sphere radius function, and we're going to paste it into our event update interaction data as well, just to the end. We're also inside our interactable base BP, we can delete these unused nodes. This was used for testing and is not currently being used, so we don't need it. Compile again and save. Now if we select our custom collision component and we go down to collision, we're going to set its collision preset to custom. We're going to select ignore on everything, and we only want it to block the SF interaction channel. Now back into our interaction manager. If we find our interaction dependencies and our general camera interaction trace, we just need to change our trace channel on the line trace that's used for the interaction to check for the SF interaction channel instead. So now back in our interaction base BP, we can give this a nice blue color. We compile and save, and if we hop back out and select any interactable, we can give it a custom collision radius. So if we hit play, we can confirm that this is all working correctly. We shouldn't need to have to look directly at an item now. We can just sort of look in its general direction. This is especially helpful for gamepad players, as looking directly at an item with a joystick can be quite tricky at times. So this just makes the entire interaction experience feel a lot smoother and more intuitive. Next, we are going to tackle some of the errors that get produced when trying to play in simulate mode. So if we go ahead and change our play mode over to simulate, and we sort of just let it go for a bit, and we hit escape, you'll see we do get prompted with quite a few errors. So we're going to cover sorting these out now. So if we hit play again and then close out, we can go through and fix these errors down the list. So let's first open up the get button brush function on the input key _w class. Let's drag over this section and slightly move it forward. And we're going to drag off of this SF Camera Manager reference, and we're going to search for is valid. So essentially all we're doing here is going down and adding a few is valid checks to the functionality that is producing these errors, as we need to check if these different classes are valid. If they're not valid, then we know that we are in a simulate mode. So again, back into our output log for our errors, we'll open up the get button key text visibility. This is also inside the input key underscore W class. Once again, we're going to drag off of this SF Camera Manager ref and search for is valid. And we can connect this all up. Let's just reposition this a little bit. Again, compile. Now let's hit save and simulate again. And let's go down and fix the next section of errors. Let's go to get button key text. And once again, we're just going to do a is valid. Let's compile and save. Let's simulate again. Now we're moving on to the interaction widget scene component. So inside the event graph, if we open up the initialize section, we can drag off of this interaction manager ref and search for is valid. So we're checking if the interaction manager is valid before we do anything further with the interaction widget scene components. Let's compile and save again. Let's hit simulate again. And let's resolve the next section of errors. So in the interaction widgets, in the descriptive layout opacity, it seems to be causing an error over here. So once again, we're just going to, on the inventory manager this time, we're going to drag off and search for is valid. And we can plug this guy in here. Connect this up. Let's slightly move this section forward. And let's reroute this so that it's a little bit more readable. Once again, compile, save, same thing. We're just going to simulate. And it seems that we aren't getting any more errors, although we are still seeing all the interaction prompts on our screen. So to fix this, add a section of code into the interaction widget scene component. So we can do a get user widget object, and then we can cast to interaction widgets. Let's make it a pure cast, so right click and convert to pure cast. And then off of this we can do a set render opacity. So now with this section of code, when we are in simulate mode, we can run this set render opacity section, as we don't need to initialize anything when we're in simulate mode. So if we just save and hit simulate, those widgets are now off our screen. And if we aren't in simulate mode anymore, we can reconnect it back up to initialize and selected viewports, and everything is running correctly again. Next, we are going to add the functionality to skip dialogues and subtitles in NPC dialogue. So let's jump right into it. So firstly, we're going to open up the sequence manager. So if we go story framework, core, blueprints, components, core again, and we find the SF sequence manager underscore AC, can open this guy up. So now inside the sequence manager, we're going to go down into the description and find the sum of subtitle delay indexes function. This is again a pastebin link that we can copy and paste into our browser. So I'll do that for you now. So if we copy and paste that pastebin link, you can click Ctrl A, Ctrl C to copy everything. And then back in our sequence manager, if we just hit Control V, it should create that function for us. So now we have that function. We're now going to open up our content browser, go to Core, Blueprints. Inside the NPC interactable base, we're going to open this guy up. We're going to create a new variable, and we're going to name it isDialogSkippable. We're going to expose this variable because we are going to use this to determine whether or not the player can skip any specific NPC's dialogue. So let's drag this guy under NPC, keep everything nice and organized. Now again, back inside the sequence manager. Again, we're going to go down into the description and look for the skip subtitled sound segment link. So same thing as before. In a new tab, let's paste the pastebin link into the URL and copy and paste into the sequence manager. Let's just slightly enlarge this comment and fit him below the other events inside the sequence manager. We can remove the 2 from this collapsed graph and the 2 from this collapsed graph as well. Let's hit compile. Everything should be compiling correctly. Now we're going to open up the content browser again. Inside Core, we're going Blueprints, Components, Other, and we're looking for the NPC Manager. Inside the NPC Manager, we're going to find the Update Replies Logic collapsed graph. And we're going to delete the get subtitles sum of delays and the delay node that is currently in place. So at the moment, these subtitles work off of a delay. So it adds up all the different subtitle delays together and delays each subtitle prompt by the total number of subtitles added to the subtitles array. So we can delete this now. We can right click and search for custom event, and we're going to name this on subtitles finished, and we can just connect them up to this branch. Again, now back in the sequence manager, we're going to add a new event dispatcher, and we're going to call this on subtitle finished. Let's compile and save. Now again, back inside the NPC manager, we're going to go back to the event graph and up to the start conversation logic. We're going to drag slowly until we get to the update replies function that is being called, or event that is being called. And we are going to select everything after this event and just move it up and create some space here. Then we're going to right click and search for get SF sequence manager. Off of the sequence manager, we're going to search for bind event to on subtitle finished. And in this event, we can drag off and search for create events. And inside the create event, we're looking for the on subtitles finished event that we created earlier. Let's compile and save again. There is one slight change we need to make to the on subtitles finished event that we just created. So if we go back to the event graph and again into the update replies logic, we're just going to scooch this guy up a little bit. We're going to do a get SF interaction manager. We're going to drag off of this and search for target NPC actor. We're going to right click in open space and search for current NPC ref. And we're just going to make sure that these are equal to one another. This is just to confirm that the target NPC that we're interacting with is the NPC that owns this NPC manager actor component. Now we can just move this back a little, and we're going to add another branch, another check. And then we can drag over all the functionality after this branch and just scooch it forward a bit. And connect it up to the true pin on the branch. Once again, compile and save. Now we're going to go into our content browser once again. Inside core, we're going user interface, widgets, and we're looking for the in_sequence_w widget blueprint. Inside the event graph, we're looking for the update subtitles logic. And all the way on the end of the set target subtitle index node, we're going to right click and search for get SF sequence manager. And we're just going to call that previous event dispatcher that we created. So we're going to do a call on subtitles finished. Once again, compile and save. Now back in our content browser, if we go to core, example, character, blueprints, and the player controller, we are going to bind the skip to the back key. So in this example, the back key is set to F, which is also used in the dialog input mapping context. So for this instance, we'll use the back key. So let's make some space here. Let's drag all the functionality forward from the stop current sequence function. And off of the sequence manager actor component ref, we're going to search for skip subtitled sound segment. Again, this can be binded to whatever input action you'd like it to be. For this example, we're using the back key. Let's compile and save. Now back in our level, if we click on an NPC in the level, we can tick the is dialog skippable boolean. And let's hit play and test this. So if we go up to an NPC and initiate conversation, we can press F or the back key to skip through segments. So that's the basis of skipping dialogue segments. We're now going to add a small little prompt on the player's screen to indicate that they are able to skip each dialogue segment. Now, once again, if we go down into the description and we find the in-sequence widget skip prompt, if we copy that paste bin link and paste it into a new tab, we can hit Control A and copy all of this over again. Now with that copied, if we open up the content browser, we're going to go to core, user interface, widgets, and we're looking for the in_sequence_w widget class again. If you're in the graph, you can come up to the top right and switch over to the designer mode. And then we can select the subtitles element and just hit Control V. That should paste it in just underneath your subtitle text. And with this, you can select your input key. You can change this to whatever key you're using for skipping subtitles. Like previously mentioned, in our example, we're using F, or on gamepad, it would be B. So if we compile and save again, and hit play. Now when we talk to NPCs, we have a little skip prompt at the bottom. We can take this one step further if we go back into our in-sequence widget and we click on this horizontal box for the prompt. We can give it a custom visibility function. Then what we can do is we can right click and search for get SF interaction manager. Off of this, we can search for target NPC actor. We can first just make sure this is valid and copy and paste the return node. If it's not valid, we'll just set it to hidden. And if it is valid, we will do the second return node, and off of the return value, we'll do a select. Let's slightly move this forward. And then off of the target NPC actor reference, we can search for is dialogue skippable. So now this prompt will only display if we are in conversation with a NPC and the NPC's dialogue is skippable. So off of false, we would have it set to collapsed. We'd also want to change this to collapsed rather than hidden. And if it's true, we'd set it to true. Let's compile and save. If we test this now, this NPC over here does not have its dialogue skippable set to true. So our prompt should be hidden. It's working correctly. Now if we go over to this NPC, we'll get our prompt again. So that covers pretty much the entire process of adding skippable dialogue segments to the NPCs. Next, we're going to set up the true first person compatibility with the camera manager. So if we open up the content browser, we go to core, blueprints. We're looking for the SF player camera underscore PCM. Let's open this guy up. Firstly, we're going to go down to variables and create a new Boolean variable, which we will call use sockets for first person. We can drag this under camera data variables. So whenever this Boolean is set to true, we will use the head socket of our character skeleton for the root location of the camera. Now inside the event graph, if we find the set SF camera data and we find the set first person settings graph, we need to make some changes here. So firstly, for the camera relative offset, we're going to drag off of this pin and we're going to find a select vector and we're going to drag out our newly created use socket for first person variable and slot it into the pick a pin. Off of A, we're going to do a make vector and we're going to give the X a value of 25. So this is a slight offset to the player camera when using the socket for the root location, the head socket. I found that the value 25 on the X is a nice sweet spot for the offset. So we're going to comment this just so we have some future reference if we ever come back and modify these values. Let's compile and save. Next, for the root location height modifier, we're just going to select these few nodes and make some space here. We can drag it forward. Off of the root location height modifier, we can drag off of this and search for select floats. Again, we want to use that same Boolean variable we created. And then off of B, we're going to connect this up to the head Z offset. And inside A, we're just going to leave it as 0, as we don't want the head Z offset value to affect the root location height modifier when we're using the head socket for first person. Let's just bring this back and tuck it in a little bit. Let's compile and save. Now back to the event graph. If we find the update camera transform functionality and we go into the set root pivot target, then get root location, we're going to make some adjustments here. So we're going to disconnect this input on the A vector pin and drag this up and get it out of the way. Off of this A pin, we're going to do another select vector, again using that same Boolean variable we created. Off of B, we're just going to use the actor location of our pawn. Off of A, we're going to do a select, just a regular select vector. And then we're going to right click and search for current camera preset. We're going to connect that into the index. And then we're going to connect the get actor location from the get player pawn into the fixed camera and into the third person camera, as we don't want to affect the third person or fixed camera when we're using the head socket for first person. Then off of first person, we're going to do a get socket location. You can delete the transform component if that gets automatically created. In socket name, we'll just do a make literal name. And we're just going to call this head. So this value would be whatever the name of your head bone is for your character mesh. Again, we're just going to give this a comment for future reference if we ever want to change it. Then off of the target, we're going to do a get player character. Off of the player character, we're going to search for get mesh. And we can connect this up to the target. Let's just bring this all down and compile and save. That should be all the functionality for setting up true first person using a socket bone. So if we go down to our use socket for first person variable and we set it to true and compile and save, when we go into first person, our camera should be at our player's head location. What we do want to do though is firstly go into core, example, characters, blueprints. This is if you're using the demo character. We can remove the set character visibility, as we don't want to hide the character anymore when we are in first person. We are, however, going to hide the bag mesh on our character. So if we compile and save and test this out, when we go into first person, we can look down and see our character, and we are essentially in true first person. So that should cover all the larger changes in 2.0. If you are experiencing any hiccups or would like further guidance with anything, please be sure to reach out either via our Discord community or directly through email.